Julia Alvarez is a contemporary Latino writer that has written essays, poems, and novels focusing on bilingualism, search for identity, relationships, and cultural conflicts. Her works include In the Time of the Butterflies, How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents, A Wedding in Haiti, Something to Declare, and The Woman I Kept to Myself. In her autobiography, Alvarez states she was raised in the Dominican Republic but had an American childhood, which results in the struggle of identity she later reveals in her works. Julia Alvarez was born in New York City on March 27, 1950, and her family moved back to the Dominican Republic shortly after her birth. She lived with her extended Dominican family and would frequently have American visitors. Her grandfather was a cultural attaché to the United Nations and spent much time in New York City. After her grandparents would visit the United States, her grandmother would often bring Alvarez and her sisters gifts such as party dresses and frilly frocks that they would never wear. Julia Alvarez attended Carol Morgan School for American Children in the Dominican Republic. With the influx of Americans, her community also received shops that catered to the American clientele, like an ice cream parlor, outdoor movie theater, car dealership, and a grocery store. While some parts of the American life were glorified, there were some aspects of it the Alvarezes disagreed with, starting her struggle with identity. First, her family considered the American cuisine to be bland, so they ate Dominican food at home. She and her sisters also wore hand-me-downs as opposed to the American girls who wore new clothes. Alvarez's family also thought higher education for women was a waste of money, therefore women stayed at home and underwent training to be a good, dutiful wife. From the young eyes of Alvarez, the American life seemed perfect since the Dominican Republic was under the dictatorship of the Trujillo. Her father was involved with the opposing forces of the Trujillo's dictatorship before Alvarez's birth and had been exiled. Her father received a pardon from the country because the government needed help from his father-in-law to keep the United States out of the country's legal affairs. There were two failed attempts to overthrow the government, and some of her father's friends were captured. She notes that through torture, these men would talk, and her father's part in the underground movement would be revealed. When she was 10, her family was granted immigration rights and moved to the United States, and as they boarded the plane, she expresses her thoughts through these words: "I was coming home at last." However, her perfect image of the United States would become tainted. When she arrived in the United States, she focused on perfecting the English language. In addition, the American children treated her as an outcast by mocking her, saying, "Go back to where you come from," worsening her plight of identity. Garcia Albert states in her analysis of How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents, many oppressed groups and individuals have turned to personal history as a means of understanding and protesting against social realities which have affected their lives and identities. This is something Alvarez does directly in her works. Her struggle with identity is revealed both in her non-fictional and fictional works. I Want to Be Miss America, an anecdote about Alvarez and her sister's desires to look like what she calls the Made in the USA beauty, directly portrays her struggle with identity upon arrival to the United States. Alvarez recounts it through these words: "We painstakingly rolled our long curly hair round and round, using our heads as giant rollers, ironing it until we had long, shining shanks like our classmates and the contestants, only darker. We wore tights, even in the summer, to hide the legs Mommy would not let us shave. We begged for permission, dreaming of the contestants' long, silky limbs." In addition to these actions, they also dressed to win the approval of the Americans by trading their vibrant Dominican wardrobes for their more subdued American trim. Contrary to I Want to Be Miss America, In the Time of the Butterflies, the historical fiction novel represents the alter ego of Alvarez's adolescent self through the story of the Mirabal sisters, also known as the Butterflies. The group of women were politically active along with their husbands in the opposition to the Trujillo's dictatorship. This novel tells the story of how the girls became aware of the oppression in the government while attending school away from their home and became involved in the underground movement to overthrow the government, which ultimately caused their murder ordered by the Trujillo but was staged as a car accident. Through this courage, the Mirabals show their willingness to contradict society and fight for their beliefs, as opposed to Alvarez, who sought conformity in the American culture with her physical appearance. Chun Inc. and Remaking Identity, Unmaking Nation, Historical Recovery, and Reconstruction of Community in the Time of the Butterflies, and The Forming of Bones asserts, presenting the Mirabals as models for oppressed women, She in fact proposes a model to which Dominicans can aspire. Through this, Alvarez is able to give girls who don't have a sound identity a role model and assurance that this is perfectly acceptable to look different than a stereotype because they all have something to contribute, like the Mirabals did when displaying courage to oppose the government and typical roles of women in the Dominican society as educated political activists. Because of her unique life experiences, Julia Alvarez is able to write nonfiction and fiction that focus on identity. Through this, she is able to achieve a personal connection with the audience, allowing people to relate to the story since a heavy emphasis is still put on physical appearance in the American culture. Today, when asked by Lucia Suarez in her essay entitled Julia Alvarez and the Anxiety of Latino Representation, how she would situate herself within major categories of literature such as Latino, Dominican, and American, Alvarez responded, "Our world is becoming a place with shifting borders where nations form and reform, but what we're really creating are new languages. There are so many hyphenated people. I'm not a Dominican writer. I can't pretend to be Dominican. But by the same token, when people ask me if I'm an American writer, I have to say I don't think of myself as being in the same tradition as Melville or Hawthorne. I'm a writer who is Latina and not Latina who is a writer, thus also revealing the new identity found in herself as a hyphenated person, a Dominican American."